The late evening sun cast long shadows across the quiet suburban street in Richmond as Marcus Thompson stepped out of his rental car. He had just landed at the airport 2 hours ago, exhausted from back-to-back meetings in Washington. The black sedan he usually traveled in was being serviced, so he opted for something low-key this time. No security detail, no fanfare, just him in jeans and a casual button-down shirt. Looking forward to a quiet evening at his sister's house. Marcus was the governor of Virginia, but tonight he didn't feel like one. He felt like a tired older brother who promised his little sister he would make it to her daughter's birthday party, even if it meant flying in late and arriving just as the celebration wound down. He checked his phone. The text from his sister read, "We saved you cake. Emily keeps asking when Uncle Marcus is coming." He smiled and pocketed his phone, then reached into the back seat to grab the oversized teddy bear he bought at the airport gift shop. It was a poor substitute for being there on time, but his 8-year-old niece would forgive him. She always did. The neighborhood was peaceful, with neatly trimmed lawns and children's bikes lying in driveways. Marcus walked up the sidewalk toward his sister's house, the teddy bear tucked under one arm. He didn't notice the police cruiser that slowly rolled down the street behind him, its occupants watching his every move. Inside the patrol car, Officer Jake Hendricks nudged his partner. "You see that guy?" he said, his voice tight with suspicion. His partner, Officer Derek Mills, leaned forward and squinted through the windshield. "Yeah, what about him?" Derek asked, though his tone suggested he already knew where this was going. "Look at him, walking through this neighborhood at night, carrying something. Doesn't belong here," Jake said, already reaching for the radio. Derek hesitated for just a moment, but that moment passed quickly. He had learned long ago that questioning Jake only made things worse. Jake had been on the force for 15 years, and he ran their partnership with an iron fist. "Dispatch, this is Unit 47. We have a suspicious person on Maple Drive. Black male, approximately 6 feet tall, carrying an unknown object. Requesting backup," Jake said into the radio, his eyes never leaving Marcus. Marcus was halfway up his sister's driveway when he heard the sharp whoop of a police siren behind him. He turned around, confused, and saw the patrol car pulling up to the curb, its lights flashing red and blue across the peaceful street. 2 officers stepped out quickly, their hands already resting on their belts. "Stop right there," Jake shouted, his voice cutting through the evening air. "Put your hands where we can see them." Marcus froze, the teddy bear still under his arm. His heart began to race, not from guilt, but from the sudden rush of adrenaline that came with being treated like a criminal. He had been in situations like this before, long before he became governor. Growing up as a black man in America meant these encounters were woven into the fabric of his existence. "Officers, there must be some mistake," Marcus said calmly, keeping his voice steady. "I'm just visiting my sister. She lives right here." He gestured toward the house behind him where the porch light glowed warmly. "I said put your hands up," Jake barked again, moving closer. Derek followed, his hand now on his weapon. "Drop whatever you're holding." Marcus slowly lowered the teddy bear to the ground, then raised his hands above his head. His mind raced through the protocol he knew by heart. Stay calm, don't make sudden movements. Comply with their orders. Explain yourself clearly. He had given this same advice to countless young men in town halls across the state, never imagining he would need to follow it himself tonight. "Can I ask what this is about?" Marcus said, his hand still raised. "I haven't done anything wrong." "We got a report of a suspicious person in the area," Jake said, though no such report existed. "We need to see some identification." "My wallet is in my back pocket," Marcus explained. "I'm going to reach for it slowly, okay?" "Keep your hands where we can see them," Derek shouted, stepping forward. Before Marcus could respond, Derek grabbed his arm and spun him around, slamming him against the side of his rental car. The impact sent a shock through Marcus's body, and he gasped in surprise and pain. "Hey, wait a second," Marcus protested, but his words were cut off as Derek wrenched his arms behind his back. The cold metal of handcuffs bit into his wrists, clicking shut with a finality that made his stomach drop. "You have the right to remain silent," Jake began, reciting the Miranda rights with a practiced monotony that suggested he had done this 1,000 times before. But he hadn't. Not to someone like Marcus Thompson. Not to the governor of Virginia. Marcus's sister, Angela, heard the commotion from inside the house. She ran to the front door and flung it open, her eyes widening in horror at the scene unfolding in her driveway. Her brother, the governor, was handcuffed and pressed against a car by 2 police officers. "What are you doing?" Angela screamed, running down the steps. "That's my brother." "Let him go." "Ma'am, step back," Jake ordered, holding up a hand. "This doesn't concern you." "Like hell it doesn't." Angela shot back, pulling out her phone. "I'm calling my lawyer right now, and then I'm calling every news station in the state." "Do you have any idea who you just handcuffed?" Jake and Derek exchanged a glance, uncertainty flickering across their faces for the first time. But they didn't back down. In their minds, they were just doing their job. A suspicious person in a nice neighborhood had to be checked out. It didn't matter that Marcus was calm, cooperative, and clearly not a threat. In their eyes, he fit a profile, and that was enough. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to calm down and go back inside," Derek said, his voice firm but less aggressive now. He could sense this was spiraling, but he didn't know how to stop it without admitting they might have made a mistake. Marcus kept his head down, trying to control his breathing. His mind was a storm of anger, frustration, and disbelief. He had spent years fighting against this exact kind of injustice, using his platform as governor to push for police reform, community oversight, and accountability. And now here he was, handcuffed in his sister's driveway, treated like a criminal for the crime of being black in a suburban neighborhood. "Officers, if you would just let me explain," Marcus said quietly, his voice strained. "My name is Marcus Thompson. I'm the governor of Virginia. My identification is in my wallet. If you check it, you'll see," Jake snorted. "Sure you are, buddy. And I'm the President of the United States." Derek, however, felt a chill run down his spine. Something in Marcus's voice, the calm authority despite being handcuffed, made him pause. He stepped closer and looked at Marcus's face more carefully. There was something familiar about him, something Derek couldn't quite place. "Jake," Derek said slowly, his voice uncertain. "Maybe we should check his ID." "We'll check it at the station," Jake replied dismissively. "Let's get him in the car." But Derek wasn't listening anymore. He pulled out his phone and quickly typed into the search bar, "Virginia Governor." The results loaded instantly, and Derek's face went pale as a high-resolution photograph of Marcus Thompson appeared on his screen. Smiling in a formal suit, standing in front of the Virginia state flag, Derek's hands began to shake. He looked from the phone to Marcus and back again, his mouth going dry. "Oh no, oh God, no. What?" Jake asked, irritated by his partner's sudden change in demeanor. Derek held up his phone, the screen facing Jake. "That's him." "Jake, we just handcuffed the governor." The color drained from Jake's face as he stared at the phone screen. His eyes darted between the professional photograph of Governor Marcus Thompson and the man standing handcuffed against the rental car just a few feet away. They were unmistakably the same person. The strong jawline, the distinctive scar above the left eyebrow from a childhood accident, the intense brown eyes that had stared down legislators and reporters alike during countless press conferences. Jake's hands started trembling. In his 15 years on the force, he had made mistakes before, but nothing like this. Nothing that would end his career and possibly land him in legal trouble. He had handcuffed the governor of Virginia based on nothing more than racial profiling and assumptions. "Take the cuffs off," Derek whispered urgently, his voice cracking. "Take them off right now." But Jake stood frozen, paralyzed by the magnitude of what they had done. His mind raced through the possible consequences. His pension, his reputation, his freedom, everything he had worked for was crumbling around him in real time. Angela was still on her phone, and Marcus could hear her speaking rapidly to someone on the other end. "Yes, I need you to send someone immediately. My brother, Governor Thompson, has been unlawfully detained by 2 police officers in my driveway." "Yes, the governor. I'm not joking. This is an emergency." Neighbors had begun emerging from their houses, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Patterson from across the street stood on her porch with her hand over her mouth. The Rodriguez family from next door stepped onto their lawn, their teenage son already filming the scene with his phone. In the age of social media, this incident would be everywhere within the hour. "Derek, do something," Jake hissed, finally finding his voice. His earlier confidence had evaporated completely, replaced by raw panic. Derek moved forward with shaking hands and fumbled with his keys, trying to unlock the handcuffs. "Governor Thompson, sir, I am so deeply sorry. This was a terrible misunderstanding. We thought You thought what exactly?" Marcus interrupted, his voice cold and measured. Now that the immediate danger had passed, His shock was transforming into controlled anger. You thought a black man walking through a suburban neighborhood with a teddy bear was suspicious? You thought that justified handcuffing me without even asking for my identification first? The handcuffs clicked open, and Marcus slowly brought his arms forward, rubbing his wrists where the metal had left red marks. He turned to face the two officers, and the look in his eyes made both men want to disappear into the ground. "Sir, we received a report, Jake started. But Marcus cut him off. "No, you didn't," Marcus said firmly. "I heard you on the radio. You initiated this stop yourself." "There was no report. You saw a black man in a neighborhood you deemed too nice for someone like me, and you decided to investigate. That's called racial profiling, officer. It's illegal, unconstitutional, and exactly the kind of behavior I've been trying to eliminate from law enforcement in this state." Angela rushed over to her brother, wrapping her arms around him. "Are you okay? Did they hurt you?" She glared at the officers with pure fury. "I've got 3 lawyers on their way here right now, and every news outlet in Richmond has been notified." Marcus gently squeezed his sister's hand, trying to comfort her despite his own turmoil. "I'm fine, Angie, just shaken up." Derek's knees literally buckled, and he had to steady himself against the patrol car. The full weight of their actions was crushing him. This wasn't just going to be a reprimand or a suspension. This was career-ending. This was national news. This was a civil rights violation against the governor himself. "Governor Thompson, please," Derek said, his voice breaking. "We made a terrible mistake. A horrible, inexcusable mistake. But please, you have to understand we were just trying to do our jobs." "Your jobs?" Marcus's voice rose slightly, the first crack in his controlled composure. "Your job is to protect and serve all citizens equally, regardless of race. Your job is to use discretion and common sense. Your job is not to harass innocent people based on the color of their skin." A black SUV screeched to a halt at the curb, and 3 men in suits jumped out. Marcus recognized them as members of his security team. They must have been tracking his location and noticed something was wrong when he didn't make it inside his sister's house. "Governor!" The lead agent, a tall man named Richards, rushed forward. "Are you all right? What happened here?" Behind them 2 more vehicles arrived. One was a news van from a local station, and the other carried Marcus's chief of staff, Jennifer Walsh, who looked both furious and terrified. She had probably gotten the call from Angela's lawyer. Jake and Derek stood there watching their lives unravel in slow motion. Other police cars began arriving, their sirens silent but lights flashing. A sergeant stepped out of one vehicle, and his face went white when he saw the scene before him. He recognized the governor immediately. "Officers Hendricks and Mills," the sergeant said, his voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Step away from the governor now." Jake and Derek complied, moving backward with their hands raised slightly as if surrendering. The sergeant approached Marcus with visible distress written across his face. "Governor Thompson, I'm Sergeant William Crawford. On behalf of the Richmond Police Department, I cannot express how deeply sorry I am for what has happened here tonight. This is completely unacceptable, and I assure you there will be a full investigation." Marcus nodded slowly, his jaw clenched. The cameras were rolling now, and he knew every word would be broadcast across the state and likely the nation. This was his moment to either escalate or de-escalate, to either seek revenge or seek justice. "Sergeant Crawford, what I experienced tonight is something that happens to black men in this country every single day," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the emotion behind it. "The only difference is that I have a title and a platform. Most people don't. They get handcuffed, humiliated, sometimes worse, and nobody knows their names. Nobody films it. Nobody holds their assailants accountable." Jennifer had made her way to Marcus's side, quietly listening while taking notes on her tablet. She knew this was a pivotal moment, not just for the governor personally, but for his entire political agenda on police reform. The reporter from the news van, a young woman with sharp eyes and a microphone, stepped forward. "Governor Thompson, can you tell us what happened here tonight?" Marcus looked at her, then at the cameras, then at the 2 officers who stood several yards away, their careers in ruins, their faces masks of despair. For a brief moment, he felt a flicker of pity for them. They were products of a broken system, trained in biases that had been passed down through generations of law enforcement. But pity didn't excuse their actions. "I was visiting my sister to celebrate my niece's birthday," Marcus began, speaking clearly for the cameras. I parked my rental car on the street and was walking to the front door with a birthday present when these two officers stopped me. They ordered me to put my hands up, refused to let me explain who I was or why I was here, and handcuffed me against my vehicle without cause. They did this because they saw a black man in a suburban neighborhood and assumed I didn't belong here. The reporter's eyes widened. "Were you injured, Governor?" "Physically, I'm fine," Marcus replied. "But the psychological impact of being treated like a criminal when you've done nothing wrong, that leaves scars. And I want everyone watching this to understand that this is not just my story. This is the story of countless Black Americans who live in fear of the people who are supposed to protect them." Derek suddenly dropped to his knees on the pavement, tears streaming down his face. "I'm sorry," he choked out. "Governor Thompson, I am so sorry. There's no excuse for what we did. None. I let my partner's prejudices influence my actions, and I should have known better. I should have stopped this before it started." Jake remained standing, but his face was ashen. He looked like a man watching his entire life collapse. He had been so certain, so confident in his assumptions, and now he stood exposed as exactly what he had always denied being. A racist cop who let his biases dictate his policing. The scene in front of Angela's house had transformed into a media circus within 20 minutes. 3 more news vans arrived, their satellite dishes extending into the darkening sky. Reporters jostled for position, all trying to get the best angle on the governor and the 2 officers whose careers had just imploded. Neighbors lined the sidewalks, some filming with their phones, others simply watching in stunned silence. Marcus stood at the center of it all, maintaining his composure despite the rage churning in his gut. He could feel his sister's hand on his shoulder grounding him, reminding him that he had gotten through this intact. But he also felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on him. How he handled the next few hours would define not just his governorship, but the fight for police accountability in Virginia. Jake finally spoke, his voice hoarse and desperate. "Governor, I know saying sorry means nothing right now. I know I've destroyed any trust you might have had in law enforcement. But please, I'm begging you, let me make this right somehow." Marcus turned to look at Jake, really look at him. The officer was in his mid-40s, with graying hair at his temples and deep lines around his eyes. He looked like someone's father, someone's husband, but he was also someone who had seen Marcus as a threat based purely on skin color. That wasn't something that could be fixed with an apology. "Officer Hendricks," Marcus said slowly, "you want to make this right? Then you need to understand that this isn't just about me. This is about every traffic stop you've ever made, every person you've ever profiled, every assumption you've made based on race. You need to ask yourself how many innocent people you've harassed, intimidated, or worse, because they fit some profile in your mind." Jake's face crumbled, and for the first time, real remorse seemed to break through his panic. "I never thought of myself as racist," he whispered, more to himself than to anyone else. "I thought I was just being careful, being thorough." "That's the problem," Marcus replied, his voice firm but not unkind. "Racism isn't always burning crosses and slurs. Sometimes it's the assumptions we don't even realize we're making. It's seeing a black man with a teddy bear and thinking threat instead of uncle. It's letting fear override common sense." Sergeant Crawford had been on his radio, and now he approached Marcus again, his expression grave. "Governor, the chief is on his way. He wants to speak with you personally. In the meantime, I need to place Officers Hendricks and Mills on immediate administrative leave pending investigation. Their weapons and badges will be surrendered." Derek, still on his knees, made a sound between a sob and a gasp. His entire identity had been wrapped up in being a police officer since he was 23 years old. Now at 35, he was watching it all slip away. And the worst part was knowing he deserved it. Jennifer Walsh stepped closer to Marcus and spoke quietly. "Governor, we need to think about next steps carefully. This incident could be a catalyst for real change, but it could also blow up in ways we can't predict. The police union will push back hard. Some people will try to make you the villain somehow. We none." Marcus nodded, but his attention was drawn to his niece, Emily, who had appeared in the doorway of the house. The 8-year-old stood there in her birthday dress, her eyes wide with confusion and fear as she watched her beloved uncle surrounded by police and cameras. Angela saw her daughter and immediately moved toward the house. "Emily, honey, go back inside with Grandma," Angela said gently. But Emily didn't move. Why did they hurt Uncle Marcus? Emily asked, her small voice cutting through all the adult noise and chaos. He didn't do anything bad. The question hung in the air, simple and devastating. Marcus felt his heart break a little. This was what he had been fighting against for years, or a world where children had to see their family members treated as criminals for no reason, a world where innocence offered no protection if you had the wrong skin color. He walked over to his niece and knelt down to her level, ignoring the cameras, the reporters, the police. "I'm okay, sweetheart. Sometimes grown-ups make mistakes, even police officers. But I'm fine, see?" He smiled at her, trying to ease her worry. "Are you still going to have cake with me?" Emily asked, and despite everything, Marcus laughed. "Absolutely. I wouldn't miss it for anything." As Marcus stood up, he felt something shift inside him. The anger was still there, burning hot and justified, but it was now tempered with purpose. This wasn't just about punishing two officers. This was about changing a system that made such encounters routine. Richards, the security agent, approached with concern etched on his face. "Sir, we should get you out of here. This situation could deteriorate quickly, and your safety is our priority." But Marcus shook his head. "I'm not going anywhere until I've said what needs to be said. These cameras are here, the people are watching. This is the moment when words can become action." He turned back to face the gathered reporters, his posture straightening, his voice becoming the one that had won him elections and passed legislation. "Tonight I experienced what millions of Americans experience regularly. We were being presumed guilty based on appearance. I was profiled, detained, and handcuffed without cause. But I'm also aware that my position gave me protection that others don't have. If I were just Marcus Thompson, citizen, without the title of governor, how would this have ended? Would I have been taken to jail on fabricated charges? Would I have resisted and faced violence? Would anyone have cared?" The reporters were silent, their cameras rolling, capturing every word. Marcus continued, his passion building. "Officer Derek Mills is on his knees right now, apologizing. His partner, Officer Jake Hendricks, is facing the destruction of his career. And they should face consequences, are real, meaningful consequences. But they are not the disease. They are symptoms. The disease is a system that trains officers to see certain communities as inherently dangerous. A system that values order over justice. A system that protects bad cops and punishes good ones who speak up." Derek was openly weeping now, his shoulders shaking. Jake stood rigid, his face a mask, but tears tracked down his cheeks silently. They were not crying for themselves, Marcus realized, but for the realization of what they had become, what they had done, not just tonight but throughout their careers. A sleek black car pulled up, and Chief of Police Robert Morrison stepped out, his face grim. He was a man in his late 50s, with distinguished gray hair and a reputation for being tough but fair. He had worked with Marcus on several reform initiatives and had genuine respect for the governor. This incident would test that relationship in ways neither had anticipated. "Governor Thompson," Chief Morrison said formally, extending his hand, "I am personally devastated by what has occurred tonight. This is a failure of leadership, of training, of culture. It reflects poorly on every officer in this city, including myself." Marcus shook the chief's hand, appreciating the directness. "Chief, you and I have worked together to try to change things. Tonight proved we haven't changed enough. Not nearly enough." "I agree completely," Morrison replied. He turned to Sergeant Crawford. "Have Hendricks and Mills been processed?" "They're being placed on administrative leave right now, sir," Crawford confirmed. Morrison nodded, then addressed the two officers directly. "Hendricks, Mills, surrender your weapons and badges to Sergeant Crawford immediately. You are suspended without pay, pending a full internal investigation and likely criminal charges. You will also be required to cooperate with any state or federal investigations that may follow." Jake slowly unbuckled his gun belt and removed his badge, handing them to Crawford with trembling hands. Derek did the same, his movements mechanical, his face blank with shock. 24 hours ago, they had been officers in good standing. Now they were disgraced, unemployed, and facing potential prosecution. A well-dressed black woman pushed through the crowd of reporters. Marcus recognized her immediately. AO Cheryl Williams, the president of the local NACP chapter, and a longtime civil rights attorney. She had been a supporter of his gubernatorial campaign and a fierce advocate for police reform. Cheryl Williams moved through the crowd with the confidence of someone who had fought too many battles to be intimidated by cameras or uniforms. When she reached Marcus, she embraced him briefly, then stepped back and assessed him with sharp eyes. "Are you hurt? Do you need medical attention? She asked, her voice professional but concerned. I'm fine, Cheryl. Angry but fine, Marcus replied. She turned to face the two former officers and her expression hardened. What happened here tonight is not an isolated incident. It is a pattern of racial profiling, excessive force, and abuse of power that has plagued this city and this country for generations. Governor Thompson's experience tonight has simply put a spotlight on what black communities have been screaming about for years. Derek flinched at her words, but he didn't look away. He forced himself to listen, to absorb the truth of what she was saying. Jake, however, stared at the ground, his jaw clenched, looking like a man trying to disappear. Chief Morrison cleared his throat. Ms. Williams, I assure you that this incident will be investigated thoroughly. We will not sweep this under the rug. With all due respect, Chief, we've heard that before, Cheryl shot back. How many investigations have resulted in real accountability? How many officers have faced actual consequences for violating citizens' rights? The only reason this is getting attention is because the victim is the governor. What about all the victims who aren't governors? Who speaks for them? The question was rhetorical, but it hung heavy in the air. Marcus knew she was right. If he had been anyone else, this would have been just another statistic. Another black man humiliated by the system, his complaints filed away and forgotten. Jennifer was furiously typing on her tablet, already drafting statements and planning responses to the inevitable fallout. Governor, the State House is calling. Lieutenant Governor Patterson wants to speak with you. Also, social media is exploding. The hashtag Handcuffed Governor is already trending nationwide. Marcus sighed. The political machinery was spinning up, and he knew the next few days would be exhausting. But he also saw an opportunity. Tell Patterson I'll call him within the hour, and set up a press conference for tomorrow morning. I want to address this properly, not just with sound bites on a street corner. A white man in an expensive suit pushed through the crowd, and Marcus recognized him as Daniel Cross, the head of the police union. Cross had been a thorn in Marcus's side since his police reform proposals began gaining traction in the state legislature. The union leader's presence here was no coincidence, he was already in damage control mode. Governor Thompson, I'm glad you're okay, Cross said smoothly, though his eyes were calculating. This is obviously a terrible misunderstanding, and the union will cooperate fully with any investigation. However, I think it's important not to rush to judgment. Officers Hendricks and Mills are dedicated public servants with years of exemplary service. They made an error in judgment, yes, but they don't deserve to have their entire careers destroyed over one mistake. Marcus felt his blood pressure rise. This was exactly the kind of response he expected. Minimize, excuse, protect the officers at all costs. Mr. Cross, this wasn't a mistake. A mistake is writing the wrong date on a report. What happened tonight was racial profiling, false detention, and assault. Those aren't mistakes. Those are civil rights violations. With respect, Governor, you're not being objective about this, Cross countered. You're emotional, which is understandable, but we need to look at this from the officer's perspective. They saw someone acting suspiciously. I was walking to my sister's house with a teddy bear, Marcus interrupted, his voice rising. What was suspicious about that? The only thing that made me suspicious was the color of my skin. Don't insult my intelligence by pretending otherwise. The confrontation was being captured by dozens of cameras. Tomorrow, the footage would be dissected on every news channel in the country. Cross seemed to realize he was fighting a losing battle and took a step back. The union will make a formal statement tomorrow, he said stiffly. But mark my words, Governor. This incident will be used to demonize all police officers. And that's not fair to the thousands of good cops who serve this state honorably. Then those good cops should be the first ones demanding accountability, Marcus shot back. Because officers like Hendricks and Mills make it harder for everyone wearing a badge. As Cross retreated, Marcus noticed that a larger crowd had gathered. People from the neighborhood, drawn by the commotion, now stood in clusters watching the drama unfold. Some held signs Arau hastily made, clearly grabbed from past protests. One read Black Lives Matter, another said End Police Brutality. The incident was already being absorbed into the larger movement for justice. An elderly black woman approached slowly, leaning on a cane. Marcus recognized her as Mrs. Dorothy Freeman, a local civil rights icon who had marched with Dr. King in the 1960s. Despite her age and fragile appearance, her eyes were sharp and her voice steady. Governor Thompson, I want you to know that what happened to you tonight happened to my son 30 years ago, she said, her voice carrying in the quiet that had fallen over the crowd. The difference was he wasn't a governor. He was just a young man trying to get home from work. The officers who stopped him claimed he matched the description of a suspect. They beat him so badly he spent 3 weeks in the hospital. No charges were ever filed against them. No investigation was conducted. My son has never been the same. Marcus felt tears prick his eyes. I'm so sorry that happened to your son, Mrs. Freeman. She reached out and took his hand with surprising strength. Don't be sorry, Governor. Be angry, be furious, and then use that anger to change things. You have a power that my son never had. Use it, because there are thousands of mothers like me who have watched their children suffer, and we need someone with your voice to finally make people listen. The weight of her words settled over Marcus like a mantle. This was bigger than his wounded pride or his personal trauma. This was about generations of injustice, about a system that needed to be torn down and rebuilt from the foundation. Angela touched his arm gently. Marcus, Emily's getting upset. Can we please go inside now? Just for a little while? He nodded, realizing that his niece had been watching this whole ordeal. What lesson was she learning tonight? That her uncle could be treated like a criminal despite his innocence. That power and position offered no real protection against prejudice. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus addressed the crowd and cameras one final time. I'm going to spend some time with my family now. Tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock, I will hold a full press conference at the state capitol. At that time, I will announce a comprehensive review of all law enforcement practices in Virginia, beginning with the Richmond Police Department. I will also be introducing emergency legislation to mandate body cameras on all officers, establish independent oversight committees with real enforcement power, and eliminate qualified immunity for officers who violate citizens' constitutional rights. The announcement sent a ripple through the crowd. These were not minor reforms, they were fundamental changes that would reshape policing in the state. The police union would fight tooth and nail against them. Conservative legislators would call him radical. But Marcus didn't care anymore. Tonight had made it personal in a way that statistics and studies never could. Chief Morrison's face was unreadable, but he nodded slowly. Governor, the department will cooperate fully with any review you deem necessary. Marcus appreciated the chief's professionalism, even as he knew the battle ahead would be brutal. Thank you, Chief. I'll be in touch tomorrow to discuss the details. As he turned to walk toward his sister's house, Derek called out desperately, Governor Thompson. Marcus stopped but didn't turn around immediately. When he did, he saw Derek had struggled to his feet, his face red and swollen from crying. I know I don't deserve forgiveness, Derek said, his voice breaking, but I want you to know that I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to undo the harm I've caused. Not just tonight, but throughout my career. I'm going to speak out about racial profiling. I'm going to testify about the culture in police departments that enables this behavior. I'm going to make sure that no other officer follows the path I took. Marcus studied Derek's face for a long moment, searching for sincerity behind the desperation. He saw genuine remorse there, but he also saw something else, the dawning realization of a man confronting his own complicity in a broken system. Whether that would translate into real change remained to be seen. Officer Mills, Marcus said carefully, if you truly mean what you say, then I'll hold you to it. But understand this, words are easy. Action is what matters. If you really want to make amends, then you need to become the kind of witness that makes change possible. You need to expose the rot from the inside. Derek nodded vigorously, grasping onto this slim thread of purpose like a drowning man. I will, I promise you I will. Jake, who had remained silent during this exchange, finally spoke. His voice was different now, quieter, stripped of the arrogance that had defined his earlier actions. I don't expect forgiveness, Governor. I don't even know if I can forgive myself. But Mills is right, this culture exists, and I've been part of perpetuating it. I taught him to profile. I taught him to see threats where there were none. That's on me. It was the first honest thing Jake had said all evening, and Marcus acknowledged it with a slight nod. Then you both need to ask yourselves a hard question. How many lives have you damaged? How many innocent people have you traumatized? And what are you going to do to try to repair that damage? The two former officers had no answers, at least not yet. They would have months, perhaps years, to contemplate those questions. Their careers in law enforcement were over, but Marcus hoped that somehow, Their story might serve as a cautionary tale for others still wearing the badge. As Marcus finally made his way into Angela's house, the crowd began to disperse. The reporters were already filing their stories, uploading video footage, crafting narratives that would dominate the news cycle for days. The neighbors returned to their homes, their quiet evening shattered by the harsh reminder that injustice could happen anywhere, even on their peaceful suburban street. Inside the house, the contrast was jarring. Birthday decorations still hung from the ceiling. Colorful streamers and balloons that seemed almost absurd after the intensity of what had just transpired outside. Emily's birthday cake sat on the dining room table, 8 candles waiting to be lit. Angela's mother, Martha, rushed to embrace her son. She was a strong woman who had raised her children in the turbulent 60s and 70s, but her hands shook as she held Marcus's face and examined him for injuries. "My baby," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "They put their hands on my baby." "I'm okay, Mama," Marcus assured her, though his voice was thick with emotion. Being back in the safety of family stripped away some of the armor he had been wearing for the cameras. Here, he didn't have to be the governor. He could just be Martha's son, scared and angry and hurt. Emily approached cautiously, carrying the teddy bear that had been dropped on the ground during the arrest. She had cleaned it off and now held it out to her uncle. "I saved Mr. Snuggles," she said seriously. "He was dirty, but I wiped him off." Marcus took the bear and pulled his niece into a hug, burying his face in her hair. This was why it mattered. This little girl deserved to grow up in a world where her Uncle Ao, where anyone at Ao could walk down a street without fear of being terrorized by those sworn to protect. Later that evening, after Emily had finally gone to bed and the house had quieted, Marcus sat at Angela's kitchen table with a glass of bourbon he wasn't drinking. His sister sat across from him, her anger having evolved into a determined resolve. "You're going to use this, aren't you?" Angela asked, though it wasn't really a question. "You're going to turn this into a catalyst for change." "I have to," Marcus replied. "If I don't, then it's just another story. Another black man harassed by police, except this time he happened to be governor. But if I can leverage my position, my platform, to force real reform, then maybe some good can come from this." Jennifer had stayed, working from her laptop at the other end of the table. She looked up and spoke quietly. "The response online is overwhelming. Thousands of people are sharing their own stories of being profiled, harassed, or brutalized by police. This has touched a nerve that goes way beyond Virginia." Marcus wasn't surprised. For every story that made the news, there were countless others that never saw the light of day. People who didn't have cameras, didn't have lawyers, didn't have the power to fight back again. For injustice. His phone buzzed with yet another call. This time it was Senator James Mitchell, a Republican from the western part of the state who had opposed Marcus's police reform proposals in the past. Marcus almost declined the call, but curiosity won out. "Governor," Mitchell's voice was somber, "I saw what happened tonight. I wanted to call and tell you. I was wrong. I've been wrong. I didn't understand. I thought police reform was about being soft on crime, about not supporting our officers. But what happened to you tonight showed me that it's about something else entirely. It's about basic human dignity, and I'm sorry I didn't see that before." Marcus was stunned into silence for a moment. Mitchell was known for being tough, conservative, and unwavering in his positions. This admission represented a seismic shift. "Senator, I appreciate you calling," Marcus finally said, "and I accept your apology. But I need more than words. I need your vote. I need you to help me pass meaningful reform. Even when the police union and your conservative base push back. You have it," Mitchell replied without hesitation. "I'll be standing with you at that press conference tomorrow if you'll have me. It's time for this to be a bipartisan issue. It's time for all of us to admit that we've been failing too many of our citizens." After hanging up, Marcus shared the conversation with Angela and Jennifer. Angela's eyebrows rose in surprise. "James Mitchell? The man who called your reform proposals an attack on law and order?" "The same," Marcus confirmed. "I guess sometimes people need to see injustice up close before they can truly understand it." Jennifer was already adding Mitchell to the press conference agenda, her mind working through the political implications. If we can frame this as a bipartisan moment of reckoning, we might actually get some of these reforms passed. The union can't fight us if we have support from both sides of the aisle. The next morning arrived too quickly. Marcus had barely slept, his mind replaying the events over and over, analyzing every moment, every decision. By 7 o'clock, he was dressed in a sharp suit and ready to face the cameras again, this time on his own terms. The press conference was held on the steps of the state capitol building, a location chosen deliberately for its symbolism. Behind the podium where Marcus would speak, the Virginia state flag rippled in the breeze. To his left stood Chief Morrison, looking grave but resolute. To his right stood Senator Mitchell, whose presence had already sent shockwaves through the political establishment. Behind them stood a group that included Cheryl Williams, several other legislators from both parties, and notably, Derek Mills. Marcus had made the controversial decision to allow Derek to attend, to stand as a visible reminder of the human cost of bad policing. Some of his advisors had argued against it, but Marcus felt it was important. This wasn't just about punishing bad cops a row, it was about transforming a system that created them in the first place. As the press conference began, cameras from dozens of news organizations captured every moment. Marcus approached the microphone, his expression serious but composed. "Yesterday evening, I experienced something that far too many Americans know all too well," he began, his voice clear and strong. "I was racially profiled, unlawfully detained, and handcuffed by police officers who saw my skin color as justification enough to violate my rights. This happened not in some distant time or place, but here, in our state capitol in 2025, to your governor." He paused, letting the weight of those words sink in. "But I want to be absolutely clear about something. I am not the victim here. I am one victim among millions. The real victims are the countless men and women who experience this treatment and have no recourse, no platform, no power to fight back. The real victims are the families who have lost loved ones to police violence. The real victims are the communities that live in fear of the very people sworn to protect them." Marcus went on to outline his comprehensive reform package: mandatory body cameras with severe penalties for turning them off, independent civilian review boards with real authority to discipline officers, an end to qualified immunity, mandatory de-escalation training, and a complete overhaul of use of force policies. The reforms were ambitious and they would face fierce opposition, but Marcus was done playing it safe. When he finished his prepared remarks, he opened the floor to questions. The first came from a reporter he recognized from the Washington Post. "Governor, some critics are already saying you're using this incident to push a political agenda. How do you respond to that?" Marcus didn't hesitate. "If ensuring that all citizens receive equal treatment under the law is a political agenda, then yes, I'm guilty as charged. But I prefer to think of it as upholding the Constitution. The 14th Amendment guarantees equal protection under the law. Last night, that protection failed me, and it fails countless others every single day. That's not political AOO. That's personal, and it's long overdue for change." Another reporter asked about the officers involved. "What do you want to happen to Officers Hendricks and Mills?" "I want them to face the same consequences that any civilian would face for unlawfully detaining another person," Marcus answered. "I want them to serve as examples of what happens when officers abuse their power. But more than that, I want them to become part of the solution. Derek Mills is here today because he is committed to speaking truth about the culture of policing that enabled last night's events. That takes courage, and while it doesn't excuse what he did, it's a start." The questions continued for nearly an hour, and Marcus answered each one with patience and precision. When Senator Mitchell spoke, his remarks were brief but powerful. "I have spent my career supporting law enforcement, and I still do," Mitchell said. "But supporting law enforcement means holding them to the highest standards. It means admitting when we've gotten it wrong. Governor Thompson and I may disagree on many things, but on this we stand united. It's time for change, and I will work with him to make that change a reality." In the days and weeks that followed, the incident became a turning point. The footage of Marcus being handcuffed went viral, sparking protests and discussions across the country. Jake Hendricks and Derek Mills were charged with civil rights violations and eventually pleaded guilty, accepting a plea deal that included community service, sensitivity training, and the agreement to speak at police academies about the dangers of racial profiling. True to his word, Derek became a vocal advocate for reform. He testified before the state legislature, sharing painful details about the culture within the police department that had normalized prejudice and excessive force. His testimony was instrumental in passing Marcus's reform package, which eventually became a model for other states. Jake took a different path. He withdrew from public life, but quietly began volunteering with community organizations working to bridge the gap between police and minority communities. He would never wear a badge again, but he found small ways to try to repair the damage he had done. As for Marcus, the incident paradoxically strengthened his political position. His approval ratings soared, not just among his base, but among moderate Republicans who saw in him a leader willing to stand up for principle, even when it was personally difficult. He won re-election 2 years later in a landslide, and his police reforms became a cornerstone of his legacy. On Emily's 9th birthday, exactly 1 year after the incident, Marcus returned to his sister's house. This time he arrived with a full security detail, but the neighborhood knew him now, welcomed him. As he walked up the driveway carrying another teddy bear, he thought about how much had changed, and how much still needed to change. But he also thought about Mrs. Dorothy Freeman's words, "Use your power." He had done that, and would continue to do so, because he understood now more than ever that leadership meant more than making speeches or passing laws. It meant being willing to transform personal pain into collective progress, to turn moments of injustice into catalysts for lasting change. The work was far from over, but at least now it had truly begun.